Ajnadayn, which were not blue but the color of dust, mixed with the sweat of 100,000 soldiers. A heavy silence reigned preceding the storm. The Romans stood in dense legions, like mountains of bronze and iron. A forest of Byzantine spears, trembling with rhythmic terror, and shields reflecting the sun's glare, dazzling the Arabs' eyes. In the heart of this dense stillness, a lone horseman emerged from the Muslim ranks. He carried a wide shield, and his helmet was not gilded. He stopped in the space between death and life, and began an act that regular armies were not accustomed to. With chilling composure, he began to unbuckle his armor. The steel fell onto the sand with a muffled clang, then followed the cloth that covered his chest. He stood there, bare-chested, with skin bronzed by the sun, and rippling muscles resembling the ropes of sturdy ships, dripping with sweat that glistened like diamonds. A Roman soldier in the front lines felt a coldness sweep through his limbs. His pupils widened as he watched this warrior smile, a smile devoid of fear, saturated with a bloodthirsty desire for the encounter. The Roman commander warden shouted in a hoarse voice, "What is this madman doing?" But the answer was not in words. The horseman drew his sword and darted like an arrow toward the Roman legions, leaving behind him dust and cries of horror, beginning to shake the hearts of the warriors who had never before seen a man challenge an empire with only his skin and his sword. But this beast was not born on the battlefield. Let us turn back, time far from the clamor of swords, to where the story begins in the heart of Najd, where the land is harsh and does not recognize the weak, and where the air carries the scent of drought and pride. Dhirar ibn al-Azwar grew up. The Banu Asad was not just a tribe, it was a school of death and dignity. From a tender age, Dhirar did not play with wood. Instead, he watched how the elders sharpened their blades. He was a boy who would go out alone in the scorching heat, learning that thirst is not an enemy, but a test of patience. The desert tempered his body before the sword did. He learned to read the language of arrows before they were launched, and how to feel the pulse of the horse, his thoughts as if it were part of his own body. He would run after untamed horses in the rugged terrain until their feet grew weary, then he would catch them with his muscular strength and tame them with his will. He grew up a born warrior who respected silence and hid behind his sharp eyes an ambition that the borders of the tribe could not contain. Dhirar grew older, and his name began to echo in gatherings of the Arabs as one of the fiercest young men of Banu Asad. He was not an ordinary fighter seeking spoils, but a master whose commands were obeyed, possessing enough camels, sheep, and wealth to live like a king among his people. He was tall, with a build suggesting that the mountains themselves had carved his body. Despite all that status, Dhirar felt a tightness in his chest. He would sit at the peak of his power, looking at the swords buried in men's chests for the sake of a camel or a water well, and feel the bitterness of the futility. He possessed everything, but he lacked a purpose. He saw in the eyes of the pre-Islamic knights a hidden fear of death. While he was searching for something worth shedding blood for, he was searching in the silence of the desert for the truth that was worthy of his sword, until news reached him from Mecca and Medina, news of a new faith, combining strength with justice and chivalry with conviction. The journey from Najd to Medina was no mere trip. It was a migration from an old body to a new soul. Entered Medina not as a seeker of spoils, but as a knight who had found his compass. When he saw the Prophet, peace be upon him, for the first time, the pride of the Jahiliyyah fell beneath the feet of the light. The Dhirar recited poetry declaring his renunciation of wealth, wine, and gambling, pledging to die in the path of God. Islam did not break Dhirar's spirit, it refined and directed his fury. That wild intensity transformed into a sacred will. He began to see in his prayer the calm before the storm, and in his faith a shield that no blade could pierce. The Prophet, peace be upon him, began to look at this warrior and see a drawn sword that knew no sheath. Dhirar no longer fought for himself. He fought for an idea and for a religion he saw as salvation for the world. After the passing of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the earth shook beneath the Muslims' feet, and strife erupted, and tribes apostatized. Many thought the sun of Islam would set. Here, Dhirar drew his sword to begin writing his history in blood under the banner of Khalid ibn al-Walid in the battles of Yamama against Muslim the liar. Dhirar was the spark that would not go out. Imagine the scene, dust obscuring view, the cries of the wounded filling the horizon. The Muslims in a difficult position, facing a fierce army that outnumbered them. Here, Dhirar emerged. He did not fight like a man, but like a hurricane. He charged into the ranks of the apostates, striking with all his might, heeding not the arrows that tore into his flesh. He was gravely wounded in those battles, a stab to his side and an arrow in his shoulder. Yet he wiped the blood from his face with his bare hand and continued to advance. He was smiling amidst the pain, and the agony only made his soul burn brighter. There, Dhirar's reputation began to spread. Like an unstoppable phantom, fear crept into the hearts of the nation-state's enemies. Now we return to Ajnadayn, where the title that would haunt the Romans' dreams was born. Khalid ibn al-Walid, with his military genius, knew that breaking the Roman formation required psychological shock. And Dhirar was that shock. When Dhirar stripped off his armor, he wasn't seeking fame, but freedom of movement, and to strike terror into the souls of enemies who worshipped Ayn. He launched himself like a leopard, light and agile, dodging swords in the blink of an eye and thrusting his blade into the gaps of Roman armor. That day he killed a number of Roman commanders in individual duels that seemed like a dance with death. The Romans, accustomed only to facing regular armies, found themselves before a devil that could not be caught, moving with the speed of lightning and striking with the force of thunder. Cries of the bare-chested devil began to spread through the ranks, and Dhirar's name reached cities before the horses did Nasa. On that day, Dhirar proved that the body of a believer is stronger than Byzantine steel. But war is a seesaw, and fate tests men with the bitterness of personal defeat. In a round of grinding combat, and after Dhirar had wrought havoc upon the Romans, he found himself alone far from the Muslim ranks, submerged in part of a Roman legion not yet broken by defeat. Imagine this tragic scene. Dhirar, who never once bowed, was surrounded by dozens of soldiers and fell. His horse was brought down. They swarmed him. They struck him with spears and swords until they weakened him. Yet they did not kill him. They had orders to take him alive, to use his leverage, or to gloat the leader through his death. They dragged him bound in heavy chains. Blood flowed from his deep wounds, and the shackles bruised his wrists. The news struck the Muslim camp like a thunderbolt. A funerary silence prevailed, and sadness cast a shadow over their faces. Khalid ibn al-Walid, who never wavered, felt a lump in his throat. The loss of Dhirar was not merely the loss of a soldier. It was the loss of the army's spirit. The tents that night were dark and save for the whispers about Dhirar's fate. Would they kill him? Would they torture him? Amidst this despair, there was another soul preparing to explode. While grief hung over the Muslim camp like a thin fog, Khawla was not crying. She sat in the corner of her tent, wiping the blade of a sword she inherited from her father, her eyes gleaming with a terrifying light. Her sorrow was not wailing. There was a silent rage boiling under her skin. She could not bear the thought of her brother, who had taught her horsemanship since childhood, now languishing in Roman shackles. Imagine the scene, Khawla in war attire, masked with a black veil, revealing nothing but the gleam of her eyes as sharp as blades. She asked no one's permission. She mounted a purebred Arabian horse and charged toward the heart of the Roman camp like lightning. When the Muslims saw that masked are charging alone, they thought Dhirar had broken his chains and returned. The rider fought with ferocity known only to the al-Azwar family, striking right and left, tearing through the ranks, and shouting with a voice choked with pain and heroism. Khalid ibn al-Walid, watching from afar, shouted in amazement, "Who is this knight who fights like Dhirar?" No one realized the truth until Khawla neared the center of the battle, where she was striking the Romans with sacred hatred, searching for her brother amidst the forest of spears. At that moment, Khawla was not a woman fighting, but fate embodied in human form. Khawla arrived, followed by the Muslim cavalry, whose hearts were set ablaze by seeing her courage, to the heart of the place where Dhirar was being held. The Romans were dragging him toward their rear camps, shackled and exhausted, waiting for a sword stroke to end his agony. Suddenly, the earth cracked open, revealing the Muslim cavalry. Khawla was in the lead, her sword dripping with blood, her eyes never leaving her brother. With a decisive blow, she took down the guards surrounding him. The chains fell, and the lion rose from his stump. Imagine this poignant cinematic scene. Dhirar stands on his feet. He grabs a sword from the ground and looks at the masked rider who saved him. When Khawla unveiled her face, Dhirar did not utter a word. The looks were enough. The sister who saved her brother from the heart of death. Dhirar returned to the field beside his sister, and the two swords united in a scene that shook the pride of the Romans. On that day, the Romans did not fight an army. They fought a family that knew no meaning of defeat. Dhirar returned to the ranks of the Muslims, carrying new wounds on his body. and in his heart pride for his sister, who became a legend, told alongside his name. Then came Yarmouk, the battle that was, like an earthquake striking world history. The Romans mobilized 200,000 soldiers, equipped with every type of weapon, supported by churches, monks, and raised crosses. The Muslims were few. Facing death head-on, Dhirar was in the heart of a storm. In this battle, his self-sacrifice reached its peak. When Khalid ibn al-Walid saw the Roman army pressing upon the Muslims' right flank like a collapsing mountain, he called out to Ikrimah ibn Abi Jahl to pledge to die. And Dhirar was the first to extend his hand. Imagine the terrifying scene. 400 volunteers led by Ikrimah and Dhirar removed their armor and chose to become the death battalion. They surged toward the heart of the Roman army like a herd. Dhirar fought knowing it was the end. He waded through swords, his body covered in blood from head to toe. At Yarmouk, he suffered wounds no human could endure. An arrow pierced his shoulder, and a sword strike tore through his side. Yet he refused to fall. He kept killing while bleeding, shouting at the Romans with a voice that no longer sounded human. On that day, it was the death battalion that shifted the balance of power. Dhirar was the spearhead that shattered the emperor's arrogance in the narrow Yarmouk valley. The war drums quieted after dark, and the cities of the Levant fell one by one. But Ridda ibn al-Azwar was no longer the young man who had left Banu Asad. His body had become a map of scars, each telling the story of a city conquered or a Roman commander who fell at his feet. Imagine Dhirar in his final years, sitting in the shadows of Damascus or Homs, wiping his sword, his edges dulled from constant striking. The eyes that terrified Roman Caesars were now filled with a calm gaze mixed with a weariness. Words cannot describe. He sought neither wealth nor status, but lived the simplicity of a soldier, awaiting the final call. He felt a strange loneliness. Most of his companions, Ikrimah, Abu Ubaidah, and others had departed in battle. Or by illness, he felt his soul was still trapped on the battlefields while his body demanded rest. He had exhausted all his energy for his cause, becoming a living legend, walking silently among people before his departure.